Joining us for the fourth in our series of CMC Solves webinars. Our topic today is going to be the CFPB are coming, the CFPB are coming. And the reason for interrupting our normal series is that we've been hearing this from so many of our clients and others that we talk to in the industry. In fact, I was at the NCCR show last week in New Orleans, and I heard about a number of agencies who are now planning for CFPB audits. And what we wanted to talk about here are some observations of what we've been hearing and some potential solutions that you might be able to put into effect if, in fact, the CFPB are coming to see you. As always, when we're finished with the webinar, we'd love to get your feedback on the post-webinar survey that will happen when you click close at the end of this session. And also, if you have any comments or suggestions about any topics that you'd like us to cover in the future, please forward those to Garrett Baird's attention at the email address that's on the screen right now. We're always interested in making sure that this is topical and relevant to the issues that you're concerned about. Also, if you have questions during the webinar, you've got a little spot on the right-hand side of your screen where you can type in a question, and we'll leave some time at the end of this for that discussion. So let's start with what we're hearing in the industry and the main buzz on the CFPB. And there are just so many different people trying to lay claim to an understanding of what CFPB are after. And there are some people that think that there's a legislative or political agenda. I don't subscribe to that theory, but I wanted some excuse to get Rambo into this presentation, so mission accomplished there. There are many people that think that what the CFPB is after is trying to set an example by calling out a particular bank and announcing a huge enforcement action that will serve as such an example to the rest of us that we'll somehow, through just fear, get ourselves in line. The theory being that those poor, unwitting customers are being taken advantage of by these big, mean, nasty banks. If you subscribe to the Elizabeth Warren view of life. Some people believe that this is a regulator that's just out looking for respect. They've been given a different sort of task than the traditional regulators. You know, the OCC is worried about safety and soundness. The SEC is worried about financial transparency and elimination of fraud. And the CFPB might give us a different set of direction because they're really after the customer and the consumer point of view. I believe, in fact, from talking to CFPB people, in fact, as recently as last week, that they really are being truthful in that they believe their mission to be doing what it takes to help the consumer. I was involved in a little side conversation at the NCCR show with 3 agency heads and a fellow from the CFPB, and they were all complaining to the person from the agency about, or from the bureau, excuse me, from the CFPB about how this was adding to their cost of doing business. And the point that came back from the CFPB gentleman was, hey guys, we know that we need to do the right thing by the customer. That's never been anything else. It's just that we're now having to do it in ways that can be verified. And to the extent that we need to add operational complexity to make that happen, aren't we really doing what we should have been doing all along? And after a couple of, sheepish moments, the consensus of the group was, well, yeah, you're right, but, I've been able to just do what was right in the past, and I didn't have to prove I was doing what was right. And we all know on this phone call that the collections business gets a bad reputation when bad eggs do bad things, and that's what the press picks up on, and that's what we all get besmirched by. So the need to have to prove that we're doing the right thing isn't all that heinous, especially since it's equally shared by all of us. So if it changes the cost structure, then bully for he or she who figures out how to do that most efficiently is sort of where the CFPB would come out on it. So before we get into it, I wanted to ask about the audience. Are you all yourselves looking to be the recipient of a forthcoming audit from the CFPB? So let me just launch this question. and I click launch. So I'll give you half a minute here to just say yes or no. And if you're not a creditor, or if you're not an agency, collections agency, but rather some other status, it might be not applicable. Give you about another 15 seconds to pull. It looks like the majority of us are planning to get a visit from the CFPB, but just about half, and roughly a third look like we're not applicable. So I'm going to close the poll here for a minute. It's interesting feedback. So what are they really asking us to do? When you step back, I know they want to protect the consumer, but what they're really asking us to do is to take the policies and practices that inform how we operate and build those policies and practices into some sort of strategy and executional mode that can be verified. And by verified, there's a dashboard of results, there's a way to handle exceptions, there's a way to escalate items that need to be handled in a fashion that allows them to be handled. There's a method to both manage and track any remediation efforts and use those efforts to then create a feedback loop that will, inform future policies. And, of course, provide an audit trail that proves that we did all of the above. And what they're really asking for is not a system that CMC or any vendor is going to just plop in on your doorstep, but rather a whole comprehensive compliance management infrastructure that's more than just the systems. It's the people and the processes that lead to the systems that actually execute those strategies. So when we talk about that, we have to break it down a little bit and say, what else are they asking for? Well, they're asking for us to maintain a series of operational controls about our business that include lots of different areas that we're all familiar with, which we'll talk about, like managing the contacts, managing the offers, managing the disclosures, and so forth. But in essence, they're all oriented toward handling the customer experience. And then you've got a lot of sort of manual or off-system processes that are typically the ones that get us in trouble. Like, how do we handle our bankruptcies and disputes, and complaints is a big one we hear about. But there is a push on their part to get us a little more systematic about those traditionally manual and specialty business processes. And as many of you are aware, they're now asking us to look at our vendor management specifically as it relates to collection agencies and how their operational controls and specialty business processes are run. But at the end of the day, regardless, for each of these, what they're really looking for is for us to be able to prove that we have control in place, that we have a level of transparency to all of the touch points and interactions and outcomes as it relates to the customer's experience. And they're asking us to be able to prove, so we call it provability. But one of the other things that's going to come to the fore here is that CFPB is a new agency, and their enforcement officers are sometimes kind of doing this for the first or second time. And so a lot of what we have to do is also not just be able to prove what we did, but explain what we did and why we did it. Some of the models that we use and some of the kind of SaaS programs have worked really well in the past, but they fail the test of explainability if we can't tell somebody how it works, why it works that way, and that it works that way consistently. I was in a meeting 2 weeks ago with a very smart analytics and modeling person from a company that creates scores, and she was describing to me that explainability of the model has now risen to the top, and in some cases is trumping the sort of statistical beauty of very complex models. And that kind of surprised me, but it makes perfect sense if you've got an examiner in who's got to try to figure out that what you're telling him you can prove you did actually does what you're saying it does. So how do you excel when the audit is upon us? And I'll just take the example of one of those areas, which is operational controls. Well, we'd like to be able to prove that our contacts with the customer, whether they're from our call center or our agency's call centers, whether they're conducted through any measure of technology, dialer, email, text, letters, whatever, web, whether those are managed in a consistent fashion and controlled in a transparent way that can be proven to be compliant. It's not so much doing the right thing like the agencies I was talking to in New Orleans, but being able to show and explain and prove that we did the right thing. Similarly on offers, both what the monetary offers are and over what period of time, but also the consistency and fairness of those offers across the UDAP and STRA and other subpopulation kinds of interests and views that the regulators are going to take. Similarly on the treatments, is everyone treated consistently and fairly? And do I have a compliant understanding of and execution of my necessary disclosures that may vary by state or municipality? With some notable examples listed in the license plates that were chosen here. But it's just being able to prove that you can do what you explained and that you were under full, transparent view of what's happening and can share that and can then show them the controls that you use to execute the strategy. So with that in mind, I'm going to launch another poll here and ask about this audience. How do you feel you are positioned for this upcoming audit, where a 1 to 5 scale says number 1 is I'm very, very nervous. Number 5 is I'm not at all nervous because we're golden. We're all set for this audit, and there's really nothing they could throw my way that's going to make me worried. And 3 is I think we're okay. So it looks like we're falling. I'll give you about another 15 seconds. I appreciate your answers. It looks like about half of us, a little less than half, think we'll make it and are trending toward feeling we're prepared, and there's a substantial portion in the about 25% range that are at great fear of being at risk. So thank you for that. I'm going to close the poll. That's good, because if everybody were golden, then we wouldn't need a webinar. So this is good. All right, so how can CMC help in all of this? What we've got with our platform is the ability to deliver an end-to-end compliance management solution from the systems point of view. Remember I said that the comprehensive compliance is more than just the systems. But if we look at the end-to-end compliance management tasks and start with the 3 that I talked about, operational controls, specialty processes, and vendor management, we've got some specific tools that you can put in place to manage the operational control, whether we're talking about your in-house collection and recovery operations or whether we're talking about agencies. And the first relates to the customer's experience. Our platform was built in order to make it easier to manage both the frequency and the execution of contacts across all of the channels of communication, digital and letter and agent, and to provide through a business rule-driven decisioning and workflow engine the transparency and control that lets you know exactly what your customer's experience is, whether it be which touch point you use to get to them, what the content is in that touch point, whether it be a document or a disclosure, and that those contents are compliant by state and municipal level segmentation. And the same thing is true for payment program offers, so that we can use a rules-based approach to ensure that the offers are both consistently and fairly applied, because your rules wouldn't include any sort of out-of-bounds bias in how they get executed. So from a customer experience standpoint, we could assist you in making sure that you can both prove and explain exactly what the customer's experience is going to be, both with an in-house deployment or an agency deployment. We also routinely for our customers are capturing express consent at the channel and even the individual address level, so you can gain the customer's consent and have a trackable, provable record of same. And as I mentioned earlier, with disclosures and with agent sort of guardrails and scripting, you can be sure that the customer's experience is not only consistent, but that it is compliant at an individual level. So I'll give you an example of that. So somebody from New Hampshire wants to change their address, and in New Hampshire there's a specific disclosure that's required. Well, that disclosure would only pop up if a New Hampshire-based customer were talking to an agent and the agent tried to change the address, or if that New Hampshire-based customer were on the web trying to do the address change. In both cases, the disclosure that's relevant to that particular state requirement would pop up, and either the consumer on the web or the agent on the workstation would have to click that disclosure was read and agreed to, and then you'd have not only the fact of the disclosure but the auditable record of the disclosure happening during that dialogue. So that's one example within operational controls. Specialty business process automation's a number of different things, as you can imagine, because there are all these specialty processes. But let's just tick through a few. So complaint tracking and remediation is a big buzzword these days in the CFPB related conversations. And in fact, the Bureau themselves would say that they're focusing in on complaints to a very high degree. And what they told us was they not only want to know that you're tracking complaints, but that you are proactively remediating the complaints and trying to figure out how to avoid their occurrence in the future. So a system that would allow you to capture them in a consistent way, and we have one of our clients asking us to deploy for them our web-based solution so that their agencies can capture complaints in exactly the same topography and data element structure as the bank itself captures them, so that they can aggregate all of the complaints and report on them in a consistent fashion across all of the different consumer touch points. Now, that in and of itself is good, but what's even better is the ability to build out workflows for escalation and for exception handling, so that you've got a record of not just the capture of the complaint, but the tracking of the actions taken in response to the complaint, the fact that the remediation back to the customer took place, the fact that there was a root cause analysis completed and logged against that complaint, and that you then have a way to track the root causes so that you can show that there are proactive remediation efforts to avoid those complaints in the future. Similarly, on compliance exception reviews, we can set up workflows within FlexCollect that will automate the steps and the data capture in such a way that you not only have the reporting capability, but you also have the ability to proactively build queues for escalation and exception handling. And that would be equally applicable for other specialty processes like bankruptcy or legal reviews or whatever. Another way that people can use the FlexCollect system to better manage these specialty processes is that you have to do some sort of sampling and monitoring on a targeted basis. With our decision tree-based approach, you can segment out test and control populations, or for that matter, smaller audit sample populations that can then be set up into a separate queue for review and for then tracking what was done at the result of the review, so you have a full reporting and audit trail on even the review process that came out of the audit of sampled accounts. Escalation queues are just an outgrowth of the same thing I just said, which is to the extent that you define a workflow process using FlexCollect, you can also set parameters that would tell you when you want automated alerts to go out to the parties in the process that are supposed to do things. Back to your complaint tracking, it could be an alert that goes to an agency showing that they've got a complaint or a series of complaints that are that have been in the same status for X days set by you, and then you both alert to them that they need to get it resolved and enter the next step, or you can queue it and you can queue it to an escalation queue for further follow-up, so that you have a full-blown process that you can show to the regulators is in place and operating. Dispute management would be the same sort of thing as complaints. The third area where we provide end-to-end compliance management support is in the agency oversight. And there's sort of a couple ways to view that. One is we've just deployed a document capture and review process that is automated. so that you can have a single repository of all of the different documentation that you require of your agencies in, again, an automated fashion that allows you to establish escalation and exception handling queues and automated alerting that would tell an agency that their certificate for the state of Michigan is about to expire and they have got to get the new one in before the end of the month or they'll be out of compliance and so forth. Another way that you could use FlexCollect is to actually enable your agencies to do their work off the FlexCollect system and therefore centralize, to the extent you want, the customer experience management, which offers their authorized, which guardrails you want to put up for what they can and can't do in terms of contacts. But with FlexCollect, you can also give the agencies as much freedom over their own strategies as you're comfortable with, and that can vary from bank to bank. Another approach that some clients of ours are looking at is just standardizing the digital channel interfaces that all of their agencies use so that they can have perhaps not quite as much control as the agency using FlexCollect in total, but can manage a consistent customer experience across the digital channels. Another way is to use our decisioning engine as an after-the-fact monitoring capability where the agencies put their results back into FlexCollect. We run the strategies to show you what exceptions and escalation queues would result because of the things that are already done. And then finally, using the decision engine as sort of a placement segmentation mechanism. So I want to ask you about your own areas of interest. And with that, I'm going to just ask you to quickly grab a look at this. So in your own operational readiness assessment for the CFPB, is your concern more about your operational controls and your ability to prove those? Is it in the manual specialty processes? Is it in vendor oversight? Or is it in some other area that we haven't covered, maybe need to think about? I see a lot of interest in the vendor oversight and the specialty processes, and a little bit not insubstantial in the, so I think you're saying everything. There's a little bit more of a leaning toward vendor oversight. I'll give you another 10 seconds. So relative scale, the vendor oversight is overwhelmingly the largest. The next one, about half as big as that, is the specialty processes, and just a smidge behind that is operations. Interesting. All right, so if there's another area, and nobody picked other, but if there's another area we need to talk about, please email Garrett or me and let us know what other areas we should be talking about. So in conclusion here, obviously the issue is it's hard to put an ROI on compliance behaviors except for avoiding the kind of reputational risk that these early enforcement actions have engendered. And I just read an article that says now the CFPB is coming after auto dealer loans, even though the auto dealers are exempted specifically from Dodd-Frank. So the CFPB put out a new guideline that says they will sue banks who fund discriminatory vehicle loans made by their auto dealers, even though the CFPB has no express oversight on auto lending. So, there's lots of potential for avoiding these kinds of risks, and we would love to help you do it. So, what can happen right now? Our little speedometer here is to remind you don't need to be going 100 miles an hour on all of these things at once, but with the CFPB in-house, it's sure nice to be showing them that you've got the car in gear and that you're engaged in driving it in a particular path. So some things we can do very quickly are getting complaint capture and tracking going, an agency document management system going, get some program offer management, and by that I mean the ability for an agency, for example, to see offers that you have approved for a given debtor customer and that are individualized, that then doesn't allow the agency to go beyond those guardrails, but rather to stay within what your prescribed and acceptable offers are for each individual. And then, of course, the whole management of the customer experience through FlexCollect is something we'd love to talk to you about. But the first three in that list are things that we could get going on literally between now and when the CFPB are coming to town. So I thank you for your time. I know we're running toward the end of the half hour. I'm going to read you a couple of questions that have come in during the process. So please explain how you can utilize a single complaint tracking solution across multiple departments or third-party agencies. So for the person asked that, FlexCollect is a web-based platform that does not require on-premise installation, and that means that you could deploy the workflow that captures the complaint, whether the person is entering it from any department within your bank or from a third-party agency. And by setting up the roles and the users that are allowed to enter complaints into the system, you can then gain visibility to how you track it across all of the different endpoints that you manage, whether they be, you know, all of your agencies or different departments or different products within the bank. So, and that's something, again, because we're web-based, we can set up and deploy in a real hurry. Another question, someone said, well, how do the agencies provide their own expertise to the collections effort if they're all working off your system? Great question. So, you know, one of the things agencies will stake a claim to is that they have IP in the form of the particular calling strategies and contact mechanisms they use and so forth. And the beauty of our solution is it doesn't require everyone using your FlexCollect system, if you're the creditor, to use your strategies. You can literally set it up so that agency A sets and maintains and operates their strategies, and agency B and C do that as well. And those strategies can be as different as night and day within guidelines that you set, for example, so that you won't allow offers or settlements or workouts or whatever that fall outside of your guardrails, but allowing for the agency's own creative energies and differentiating IP, and yet you get to see everything they're doing. And you see it as it's happening instead of seeing it at the end of the month after the fact. So that's a very big difference that FlexCollect brings versus some of the more traditional collection systems. Time for maybe one more question. So what benefit is there in putting the information in your agency portal versus our just having the data? Answers are three things. One, there's an efficiency gained by not having to deal with the manual processes. Second is you greatly reduce the errors in the process when you make the agencies do the data entry in a consistent format. And third, you now have it systemically captured so you can do automated workflows for exception handling, alerting, and reporting. So anyway, we're out of time. I really appreciate your time today. If you have any questions, please send them our way and give us your feedback in the post-webinar survey, and we'll look forward to speaking with you next month. Thanks a lot.